recording this. Good afternoon, Corona Daze Professional Development Group. I am Danette Edwards, the founder of CDPD, Corona Daze Professional Development Group. This afternoon, I'm here with Adriana Crawford, and she's going to talk to us today about our mental health, mind over matter, mental health matters. And I'm going to immediately turn it over to her because you guys know I messed this stuff up. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to tell us a little about herself. Before she begins, I'm going to stop my video and then I'm going to mute myself. Ms. Crawford.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you all for tuning in and watching. As Annette said, my name is Adriana Crawford, and I'm a workforce diversity, equity, and inclusions a specialist and a nonprofit strategic consultant. So I wear a bunch of different hats, but overall, my passion is in connecting with people and helping them tap into the skills that will help them thrive. And so that's what this session is going to be all about. My personal story of dealing with mental health, mental illness, while also juggling the role of being a leader and a manager. And so it was tough. Sometimes it still is tough. And I recognize that for those of us who are in leadership, we very often put ourselves last. And so I hope that what you take from this session is, one, that you are not alone at all in some of these complicated feelings that you may have. And secondly, that there are tools that you can walk away from right away after this session that you can enact and implement right now to see a better life and to begin to put yourself first so that you're not just surviving, but that you are learning to thrive. All right, so Danette, you want me to just go ahead and keep going?
Yes, go ahead. The floor is yours until the end. I'll jump in the end.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So as I mentioned, I'm a workforce development specialist, and first going to take you through to a story time. So for one, I'm not in my location back here. I wish I was, but I mentally put myself there during times of stress or just to set a nice scene. But about 2 years ago, that's not where I was. So I've been in the workforce for quite some time, having different jobs, moving to Washington, D.C. About 2 years prior. So this was 2 years ago. So it's been 4 years since I've been in D.C. And I'd been in a space where I was working for the Chief Information Officer over at Homeland Security. I took a total pivot to try something new, but then I realized very quickly that I wanted to go back into workforce development, and I happened to be hired for a job that was really, really important, really visible. It was the most money that I'd been making at any job, and it was going to require a lot. I was going to be working within one-stop operations in the District of Columbia, managing and strategizing different workforce policies and the system as a whole within DC. It was a relatively new role. There was a lot of external stakeholders, clients, a lot was on the line. I felt up to the task, and so I jumped in. I had a team that also needed training up, so to speak, and we were ready to go. Very quickly, I realized I wasn't sleeping very much. I was overthinking a lot, but I figured, come on, you've just got this new job. It's a big deal. Of course, it's normal to lose sleep. Of course, it's normal to have these bouts or these periods where you're overthinking and you're going through this loop. Why wouldn't you occasionally have panic attacks? There's a lot on the line here, and you've got to build these relationships, and in some instances, rebuild or repair certain relationships. So it's natural. It's a natural progression when you're starting and you have a lot on the line and you're a perfectionist. To sometimes your body will suffer. These are the things that I told myself because it's what I'd always told myself. It's what I'd been taught to tell myself. Going through the world, being a high riser, being very ambitious, that it was natural to experience some of these things. And so several weeks went by. There were periods of time where at the end of the workday, I would crash. And by crashing, it would mean just kind of zoning out in front of the TV, but not watching TV, during the weekends, not answering the phone, not wanting to speak to anyone, unplugging, mentally unplugging almost literally, and being in a space where I just didn't feel much of anything. And at the time I was in a relationship, and, I thought it was pretty normal, or normal considering the environment, considering everything that had happened. I'd also purchased a house a couple of months prior, so I was still working on renovations and everything associated with that. And my business had began to grow a lot and very quickly. And I didn't quite have all those ducks in a row. And my business is very personal, one-on-one. So I'm serving clients sometimes on the weekends, after work, if that time is there. And I'm also putting my all into this job. So this is my reality at this point. And a couple of weeks in, I noticed at this point I was really barely sleeping. I had a Fitbit and started tracking my sleep, and noticed that about every hour I would wake up, even if it was subconsciously and I didn't remember waking up. About every hour I would wake up. I would actually sleep maybe 6 hours, and I would tell myself, well, 6 hours is normal. But the quality of my sleep was very disjointed, and it almost took me 3 hours at any given night to actually fall asleep. So these were the things that was happening. But generally speaking, it was manageable. I recently gotten a therapist. I didn't get a therapist for that. I got a therapist just to kind of talk about general things and coping skills, but I didn't connect any of the dots. And then about 6 weeks after I started my job, my relationship ended. And it wasn't necessarily a surprise. It was a kind of a slow time going. And those of you who've been in relationships probably know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you kind of know it takes a while. You know what's going to happen, but then it happens, right? So relationship ended. And I figured, of course, I'm sad. This is something, even though I knew, I kind of felt that it was on its way to the end, that it was manageable. It was during the weekend. No, it was at the top of a weekday, but I figured I'd be okay. And then 2 days later, I was very quickly not okay. I distinctly remember being at the office and texting a friend while in the middle of planning out meeting minutes and a bunch of different things, and distinctly getting this thought in my mind, an invading thought almost of, I just want to go to sleep and never wake up. That was this thought that just came in while I'm dealing with everything. And I didn't know what it was, in terms of, I didn't know intellectually to identify it as a depressive episode or the onset of a depressive episode. It'd been the first time that I thought anything like that. But it suddenly became not just a whisper, not a thought, but it became the only thing that I could focus on. I barely got through the rest of the workday because all I could focus on was going home. So I'm gonna pause there because I want to get back to that. And hopefully, as I talk through the remainder of this, you're gonna start to connect the dots of the things that, if I knew at the time, I would have known to look out for, and I would have known to identify that I was in serious trouble. So let's talk about what it means to be a leader, and you're dealing with the common everyday stresses of what it means to be a leader. So let's say you have a team of maybe 4+ people. Let's say you have several clients, maybe you work in a contractor capacity or a consultant capacity, and then you have your own supervisor or managers. Let's say there's a performance attached to it. If you're in sales, if you have standard performance benchmarks that your team or your program or your contract must meet in order for your bosses to be happy, but also for you to keep the contract. And then you have a team that you're responsible for. I found that the warning signs are hidden in what you may have always identified as the common stressors of day-to-day life. Let's start with sleep. I know, statistically speaking, they say that a lot of Americans do not get nearly enough sleep in any given night. You're really supposed to be getting about 8 hours of sleep a day. That's the standard, and most Americans don't. So what's the difference between not getting quite enough sleep versus a worrying amount of or lack of sleep? Well, it can start with really maybe taking a really long time to actually fall asleep. You're just in the bed, on the phone, maybe on social media, and maybe you're attributing it to, I don't know, just, oh, I'm just a little bit stressed out at work, or my mind is running with a couple of different things, but eventually I'll fall asleep at 2 or 3 in the morning. And then I wake up again at 7 a.m. or 7 or 8 a.m. to do it all over again. Maybe it's the quality of your sleep. You're struggling to sleep deeply throughout the night. You wake up the next day and you feel as if you barely got any sleep at all. So that's sleep. Let's move on to overthinking. I think a lot of us, especially those of us who are high performers, who are leaders, many of us would say that we might be overthinkers in the working space. It's natural to overthink. We have to consider every different factor. We not only do we have to think about the requirements of our job function, the different moving pieces. If you're in program management or something like that, where you're managing budget like I do, you're thinking about facts and figures, performance, numbers. You're thinking about this program, that program, this meeting with that person constantly. So what's the difference between having a mind that looks like a kaleidoscope because you have to keep everything there and housed versus overthinking? Well, it starts with when your overthinking and your thought process becomes a hindrance or a distraction to your day-to-day life. As in, it starts affecting your ability to remember things that you typically would remember. If you suddenly find that your memory is a lot worse than it used to be, or as if common things have slipped your mind because you have almost obsessive level of thinking, and you tend to think about the worst possible scenario for many instances, and it becomes almost a cycle, that can be an indication that something might not be normal, especially as I mentioned, if this becomes disruptive in your everyday life. So there's overthinking. And I want to also be clear here that even with lack of sleep and overthinking, you can still be a high performer. It's actually very common, and it's part of the reason why many people struggle to even think that there's anything wrong. So they'll just dismiss it as workday stress. The next piece, and before I mention this, I want to make sure that I'm clear here. I'm not a mental health provider. So if you're finding that some of these things I'm saying really resonates, and you think, wow, I think maybe I need to see someone or something like that, maybe you should see someone. I'm not a mental health provider, but we're going to talk the resources in which you can find a mental health provider, okay? I'm someone who has been affected by it and who's been able to overcome it, okay? Next one, substance abuse. And so it may not look like maybe what you've seen on television, or maybe in the worst case scenarios where someone is visibly impaired by a substance, but it can look like maybe the happy hours Monday through Friday don't consist of a glass of wine, but a bottle of wine multiple times a week. Maybe the need to indulge in any kind of recreational drugs or activities that you may do on your own starts to affect your workday because you feel a need that you have to do it during the workday just to get through the day. Is at a point where you're willing to overdraft your bank account to just get that one bottle of wine because, God, if you can just have the 2 glasses, it'll calm you down. Today was a rough day. You've got a Zoom happy hour with some of your friends back from your hometown. What's the big deal if 2 glasses turns into 5? Okay, what's the big deal if you happen to do it every Sunday evening and you wake up groggy and hungover every Monday? So your Monday mornings always seem to start a little bit later because it takes you a little bit longer or a couple cups of coffee to feel normal again. Might sound familiar. And everything that I say to you, I should have been saying to myself. So I want to be clear about that. So we went over sleep pattern, overthinking, substance abuse, and then I touched a little bit on the memory loss piece as well. Then there's the apathy. This one is tricky. because apathy can be a personality trait. Some of us have more laid back or subdued personalities where we're not necessarily super upbeat and animated in our day-to-day lives. So it doesn't necessarily raise anyone's awareness or raise anyone's flag if we're just more subdued, maybe a little more subdued than usual, where it doesn't matter what we eat. It doesn't matter that someone was mean to us. It doesn't matter that we had a big win at work. It might be a fleeting emotion and maybe a fleeting moment of, okay, this feels good. Or, yeah, they probably shouldn't have done that. That really sucks. That was mean of them, but whatever. I don't care. You find yourself feeling that for a sustained amount of time, so this is going on for weeks, there may be something else going on there. The feeling of not caring at all, feeling numb. And I have to mention this because when people mention mental illness in the extremes, right, depression or anxiety, which are incredibly common, by the way, we often think of someone who is having either an extreme high where they're having constant panic attacks and anxiety attacks, or extreme lows where they're crying in their dark bedroom and barely getting out of bed. And that can absolutely be the case. And if that's something that you've experienced or you've witnessed, that can absolutely be what's going on. But this is really tailored to the high performing leader who hasn't seen that in themselves and hasn't experienced that, or maybe not a sustained amount of time, but generally because they're able to function and function relatively well, that they think feelings of apathy, not sleeping, overthinking, maybe indulging in too much, substances, they think that that's relatively normal because they can still get the job done. And that is where we can run into some issues. So how can we, if we decide, you know what, I think that something's wrong. Like, let's say you're listening right now and you're hearing me talk and it feels as if I'm almost talking directly to you, and you're saying, oh, how does she know all of this? This is crazy. It's because everything that I've said to you and I'm saying to you, I should have said to myself if I knew what to say. So if you're feeling right now that maybe something's going on and you don't quite know what to do next, let's talk about solutions or potential next steps or tools that you can take if you're beginning to recognize some of these patterns. The first things first is identifying it. So they always say that the step one, the best thing to do is to admit that there's a problem. And in this case, you may say to yourself, I think that there might be a problem. Well, what do? I don't know what to call it. I can't name it. I just know that something is off. Something has been off. Maybe I've always been this way and no one has mentioned that maybe this isn't very sustainable because I crash often. Or I always thought that, well, I'm an introvert, so yeah, it's normal to crash after a long day or a sustained amount of time, but this feels a little different. So the first step is to identify. Once you identify, then you can move to, maybe I need to talk to someone. And I want to say something here. If you're watching this, or if you're watching this live now, then that means that you have some level of interest or some level of accepting mental health issues as valid. But there are many, many people who don't, or many people who struggle with the notion or the concept that a mental health crisis or a mental health situation can be just as crippling, if not more crippling, than a physical one. And I'm glad to see some questions coming in, and I'm going to address them in a little bit. So I will address your questions. Please, continue to ask your questions. So you may find that this is speaking to you and you don't know where to go next. Look into getting a mental health therapist. The stigma of mental health is just that, a stigma. If your ankle was twisted and you were hobbling around and unable to move about the world, everyone would tell you, you need to go see someone. This isn't sustainable. You are limping. It is clear that you need assistance. We should treat a mental health crisis or any sign or indication of a mental health challenge the same exact way. So I recommend first looking into, if you have health insurance, looking into what your benefits are. Many health insurance policies cover mental health and it may be identified as behavioral health. Uh, so look into your plan. You can call the number on the back of that insurance card if you've got one. You can go to your insurance provider's website and look and see if it's covered. Look to see what your copay may be, and decide from there if you have a particular demographic of what that therapist will look like for you. Generally speaking, in the mental health space, there are psychiatrists. So that is a medical doctor trained in psychiatry. They are the only mental health provider that can prescribe medicine, unless it's a nurse practitioner. But generally speaking, psychiatry works in mental health issues in which they will prescribe medication. You may have a licensed clinical social worker who is focused on a wide array of social health issues, and in this case, maybe focus on mental health. And you may have a licensed counselor or a psychologist, all of whom may practice different modalities. A modality is the tool or the area in which they choose to practice mental health. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds of that. You can do some of that digging on your own. But ultimately, many people choose to filter our demographics by gender, race, religion, language. So you can do that if you decide, you know what, I do want to talk to someone. If you go the insurance route. Let's say your insurance doesn't cover it, or let's say you don't really want to go through insurance, or maybe there's a therapist that you came across who doesn't accept your insurance. What do you do then? You have a couple of options here. Psychology Today is the resource that you want to go to. Psychology Today, generally, any mental health therapist or any mental health professional in the field is on there. You filter by your location, and these days, the majority of mental health professionals provide virtual sessions, and you can filter by the demographics I mentioned earlier. And it'll show you, and you can filter by insurance as well if you want to go that route. So you can also see their scale. So many psychologists and psychiatrists let me not say psychiatrists, but many mental health professionals, you're going to be hard pressed to find one who does a session for less than $100 per session, and it goes up from there. If that exceeds your budget, if you are not working with insurance, you can also work with Open Path Collective. Again, that is Open Path Collective. It is a nonprofit organization that strives to connect mental health therapists with all people of varying budgets. So many therapists have a specific slot. Maybe they'll say they can only take 5 Open Path Collective patients. And if you go there, again, you can filter by the same demographics I mentioned, if that matters to you. And the thing with Open Path Collective is that after a one-time $50 fee, you then have access to therapists who charge anywhere between $30 and $60 per session. So that's a massive difference, right? And I want you all to really know this, jot it down if it's something that you're interested in. So we talked about first of all, identifying that there's a problem, and then getting help, and getting help through a number of ways. The third would be perhaps after you've begun seeing someone, maybe, and you can only be officially diagnosed by a doctor or a clinical psychologist, maybe you see that, okay, I do have this diagnosis. Maybe you've been diagnosed with depression. Maybe some of you are currently diagnosed and you're struggling, and you're thinking, okay, what do I do here? Some people have different views on this, but you may want to tell your employer if you are working with one. You do not have to disclose to your employer at all, but let's get real here a little bit. Sometimes, depending on the environment in which you work in, depending on the requirements and the nature of the role, CYA. I think everyone knows what that stands for, but it means cover your bases. And what that does is that a mental illness is covered in most instances under ADA, which means that if you at any point in time find your mental illness to be a significant hindrance from you doing your work, then you have a right to ask your employer for reasonable accommodation. And a reasonable accommodation can look like anything from working from home, which most of us are doing now, to having an alternative work schedule, to perhaps getting instructions or directives delivered through a different medium. So for example, someone may not do well being given instructions during a phone call. Hey, can you get this report to me by 2 o'clock? And then I also need this and this and this and this and this and this. Click, and that's it. Someone may not do very well operating that way, especially if you're dealing with some of the memory loss or the memory, the retention of memory due to some mental health challenges. So you may say, it's better if you email them to me, if you can do that. That is a reasonable accommodation. But again, you do not have to disclose. I think in some instances only you can know, or we can talk about it in a separate session, what works best for you and how you want to navigate disclosing that information, while also reasonable, of course, being concerned about your job and not wanting to be potentially discriminated against in any way. Now let's talk about what it means for how you manage this as a leader, with direct reports, with people counting on you to not only lead and manage them, but to continue to set the vision and drive the mission of your program or your company forward. What does that look like? First things first, and you may consider this first or maybe second, but I say it's first, boundaries. I can't express enough the importance of setting boundaries. And I think for some of us, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's just based on the nature of how we view work, that maybe there's no space or place to establish a boundary. But a boundary doesn't mean texting your manager or texting your funder, hey, can you do this for me? No, actually I can't, I'm taking a mental health day. That's not what I'm saying. But it means not putting yourself in positions, or regularly putting yourself in positions where you say yes and you end up either over-promising and under-delivering, or over-promising at the expense of your mental health. This is super, super common with high achievers. And it also happens sometimes from our direct reports. They may have a kind of relationship with us, or maybe they're used to calling us after work hours if they need assistance or guidance or mentorship. Or maybe it's normal for your dynamic for one of your employees to give you a call, at random times during the day. And even if you're in the middle of something, if it sounds like they're in the middle of a crisis, that you'll drop everything to address it. Boundaries means establishing the standard that works best for you and sticking to it, plain and simple. I had a mentor once tell me, a favor that you do today becomes your job tomorrow. In other words, meaning the moment you say yes, when you didn't even really want to say yes to something that was outside of your capacity, that would have stretched you really thin, but you said yes anyway because you wanted to prove yourself, you wanted to give of yourself. But the moment you say yes, that gives that person the permission to just make that part of your dynamic moving forward, where they can stick you with a huge project last minute that was almost impossible for you to turn around by the due date, and you knew it was going to be impossible to get it to you by the due date, but you said yes anyway. It gives maybe your employee the permission, or your direct report the permission to say, you know what, I don't understand this. Can I give you a call at 5:30? 5:30 is the end of the workday. And normally you would have said yes because you have a great relationship and you're mentoring that person. but you do, and you do it anyway, even though you really, really just need to take a few deep breaths and take a moment at the end of the day. But she said yes. Boundaries is saying, to the best of my ability, my work hours are from this time to this time, and that is all that I can give. And I'm happy to take that phone call with you, or I'm happy to talk about the project in more detail, but I'm not going to be able to get it to you by close of business Friday. Does close of business Monday work? And being open and transparent about that. You don't have to go into the details around, oh, well, actually I'm having, a depressive episode right now. No, I mean, that may not be totally necessary, but it's helpful to be transparent and be communicative and say, you know what, I really don't have the capacity for that, so I'm not going to be able to take that on just yet, but please consider me for something else, or maybe if there's room for me to contribute on a supplemental basis, I can help with that, but I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver on this. And it's just that, I'm not going to say it's just that simple, because not all of us are have the benefit of working in maybe a more positive environment where that would be received relatively well. And if you don't, then again, that's something that we can talk about separately. But that's how you can communicate that your boundaries are important. They're really important. And I kind of looped in the second piece, which was the transparency bit. But boundaries are really important. And they also matter at home too, which is the next area. Sometimes work isn't the source of some of these stressors or some of the factors that really contribute to the deterioration of our mental health. Sometimes it can be personal. For those of you who have a lot of at-home responsibilities, caring for children, caring for sick relatives or affected relatives who may have been laid off or are underemployed right now, a lot of that can take so much of your time that by the time it's time for you to check in at work, you're not bringing your full self. I want you to consider, because I don't know what your home lives look like, but I want you to consider how you would lead in your home if the environment was a little bit different. So in the way that you show up every day for work and you show up for your team and you set your strategies and you're killing it in all different areas, despite everything going on, and it's coming at an expense to yourself, how would you strategize things going on in your personal life that might be really affecting your mental health? Does it mean having a conversation with the persons that live with you and letting them know that you can't be on during the 8-9 hour workday and on 8-9 hours at home all the time, that you need some assistance and help? Does it mean having that communication? Does it mean setting a boundary? Does it mean establishing a bedtime, even if you're not fully falling asleep right then and there, but saying that this is the bedtime? I don't know. I think the best way is for you to know that. And if you wish, we can talk about that later. But I want us to rid ourselves, and this is often the case for many women as well. I want us to grow comfortable with the idea that we also deserve to come first. You may have heard this phrase many times, and I'll say it again, but you can't pour from an empty cup. You're the cup. You have to be full, or you're the best version of full that you can be right now. So if you constantly give and give and give, there's nothing really left for you, and you may eventually crash, which leads me to the second part of my story. So you may remember that after my relationship ended, I had this invading thought of, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. I couldn't focus. It was all I could think about. So I went home and I tried to go to sleep and never wake up. And if it was not for the friend who I was speaking to at the time, who called my loved ones, my support system, I'm not confident that I would be here speaking with you all today. That is how serious it got, and it happened very, very quickly. And the events after which were like a whirlwind. It was one of the, if not the most critical pieces in my life and one of the transformational phases of my life, period. And this isn't a sad story because I'm here and I'm here to share with you my experience, but it is one that I want you to consider as one part warning sign and one part a success plan for you. Because when I went to the hospital, when I talked with psychiatrists, talked with my family, talked with my, at that point, my then ex, everyone was baffled. But you just bought a house. You just got this great job. Didn't you just say that, your business is growing really, really well? I don't understand. What do you have to be sad about? What do you have to be depressed about? Everything is going well. You just renovated this, you have your friends, you're planning a trip to Paris. What do you have to be sad about? It is one of the most puzzling things about mental health, which is that it doesn't always come in marching like a parade through your mind. It starts off as little whispers. It starts off as nudges, and then sometimes it's a full-fledged attack, an episode. And the reality is that no matter how many goals you set for yourself, no matter how well you are doing at work, no matter what the external looks like, if internal you are feeling like something is wrong, then something is wrong, because no one knows you like you. And I want you to walk away knowing that no one knows you like you. And so if you feel that things are a little bit out of whack, that's the first step. And you can follow the directions and the plans that I set forth. Because as many of us who feel a deep sense of responsibility, maybe to our families as an example, maybe to our employees, because they look to us or they look up for us, ultimately, we have to put ourselves first. We do. So I got help. I stayed with that therapist that I started working with for something totally different. So we had to totally change our plan. I became more transparent because I was very ashamed at first, really ashamed. I felt as if there was something wrong with me. I didn't know how to even say anything to anyone about what happened. But you remove shame when you get to tell your own story. And this is a story that I've told a few times, but it is one that is important. And if you have a similar story, or if you felt something similar, or in the vein where you lost control or had panic attacks or anxiety attacks, you can remove the teeth from it by telling the truth to power, maybe not in a wide forum like this, but telling the truth and telling the truth to your loved ones, and to being clear that these are the things that matter to you and you have to come first. And so right now, although I wish I was wherever this is, I wish I was in Jamaica right now, but even though I'm not, I can confidently say that I have the support system. I'm doing particularly well in my business, at work. We're more successful and high performing than ever. I have a team, a pretty significant or sizable team. And while I may not have told my team or may not have told everyone I come into contact with my story, pretty quickly when you begin working with me, you'll know that I have boundaries. You'll know that I care deeply about you or my client. But ultimately, the boundaries come first because I know just how bad it can get. So I hope you took something from this, and I'm gonna now address and answer the questions that are now in the chat box. All right, so let's start. I guess, Ned,
You want me to read them? I'll read them to you.
Sure.
Okay, so let me go up. All right, so the first question is, does being a Black person or Black woman weigh in here in any way? If so, how? Or a woman, period. Black person, Black woman, or woman.
Absolutely. So I'll start with being a Black woman. So I believe, and when we talk about any social issues through the lens of intersectionality, which is that there are unique challenges and struggles that come when identities intersect, womanhood as well as Blackness. And so in my case, as a Black woman in a company and in an environment that was mixed race, but generally speaking, I reported most to white people. Um, a lot of my dealings, my interactions with stakeholders were white men, and that had been traditionally my career path moving through leadership. So I was intimately aware that, all right, number one, you got to work twice as hard to get to where you need to go. That's the general rule for Black people. You need to work twice as hard to get half as far.
Yep.
And as a woman, it was also constantly warring with myself about what it means to be um, not just not just a woman, but a Black woman, and how that positions myself in this space where I have to wear all these different hats and not be too much of anything. So not too loud, but not too soft, because I'm trying to get things done. At the same time, I mean, even thinking about and stressing over things to wear, things like that. Those definitely come into play for sure. And I mean, there's just the general overarching dealing with microaggressions.
Yeah.
In those instances, I haven't dealt with outright racism, but it has happened for me working in different spaces throughout the years. And you know, this is a separate conversation, but there is scientific evidence that racism, sexism chip away at the human psyche. There's a psychosomatic effect on our bodies and as well as in our minds. Um, it's an onslaught. So yes, it definitely I think affected me for sure over the years.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So, and a lot of what you said resonated with me as a woman, as a Black woman,
Yeah.
especially dealing with a lot of white males and, the subtle microaggressions. Do you think the use of technology heightens these issues?
I think that they can. So there is some emerging research that I've come across and read that indicate that, for one, there's a reason why, for example, people can feel very fatigued after a day of working at home, but they've had a bunch of Zoom meetings, and it's because over video chat, first of all, it's depending on who you work for, they may feel that in order to stem or to address the gap as to not working in person, that you need to add a bunch of extra meetings in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah.
challenge is that when you do Zoom meetings, and many people may not know this, but we end up feeling tired often after such a meeting because we are exaggerating a lot of what we wouldn't typically do if we were speaking to someone in person. So
Mm-hmm.
generally, we speak louder, we express or gesture more because we have to in order to convey a particular emotion, in order to really convey the tone of what we're trying to express. So doing that a bunch of times can really, really be draining for someone who's already struggling with feeling as if they don't have any boundaries. I mean, it's already been proven that working from home means working a longer day.
Mm-hmm.
So we're working more, we're doing a lot more, we have to be on more. There's no distinction or separation between work and home. So if your home life also requires so much out of you, I mean, that's also part of the gendered conversation. If it requires so much out of you, especially as women, where there are certain expectations of us in terms of caring for family, children, and the like, um, it can definitely affect a lot. And then there's also the idea that technology can be used as much as we can to make it work, but nothing beats human interaction. And
Mm-hmm.
the absence of human interaction can also be incredibly damaging for some
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. See, I'm noticing that now. Um, Okay, we have, does religion and or spirituality hinder or help in your opinion?
In my opinion, it can do either. Religion and spirituality mean different things to different people, and for some people, for example, I can say for myself, I grew up in a very religious home, in church all the time, know the Bible back and forth. Um, but I found that as I got older, it didn't quite have the same effect on me that I saw it was having on other people. I felt that certain aspects of it, and truth be told, it could have been the the narrative that I was hearing based on the church or the places of worship that I went to or the people that I was around. But I found it in some instances to be oppressive and in some instances anti-science. For example, dismissing. I distinctly remember being at a church when a pastor um, said, and you have some of these people talking about going to therapists, and you know what? Half of those therapists have more problems than you. Don't go to therapists,
Mhm.
go to the Lord, right? And so that can be incredibly damaging for someone who is struggling, really struggling, and they're praying, and maybe they're talking to their pastor, but their pastor isn't a mental health professional. And prayer can work. It can be really transformational in people's lives, and prayer can be used interchangeably with meditation or manifestation, which I align with these days.
Mhm.
But for some people, it can feel as if they need something more, but they've been told not to get anything more, right? Whereas, and so for other folks, and this has happened for myself as well, in my opinion, having a deep sense of spirituality, really connecting with in my case, higher power, God, has really helped me because it feels as if I'm tapped in more to my purpose and that I'm here for a reason. So for my opinion, it depends.
Okay. I accept that. I want to say thank you, Adriana. I am loving this chat. I want to just thank you. There are more questions and I'm going to get to them, guys, and please continue to drop them in Facebook. Thank you for your candor, and your vulnerability, your honesty, and your delivery today. Your delivery is excellent. It is very well received, and this is um, the feedback that I'm getting and what I'm feeling right now. So let me go to the next question. I really appreciate you sharing in this way. So we have, once you made these discoveries and were given medication to heal your symptoms, if you were given medication, how long was your road to recovery? I feel mental health is a daily issue, which will always require attention.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I was staunchly in the beginning, staunchly against medication. Um, I, I felt as if it was I was going to be addictive or addicting, and I associated taking I had a stigma within myself, to be honest, because I felt that taking medication made it realer. It made it more real, and
Mhm.
I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to become dependent on medication to make me feel normal. But after having conversations with my doctor, my therapist, I decided to take it because after looking at the statistics for those who do attempt or who do have self harm or have suicide attempts, they have a huge percentage or likelihood of attempting again. And so as much as I was averse to the idea of medication, I didn't want to run the risk. So my doctor and I made a plan where after 6 months we'd revisit and then develop a tapering off plan if my progress was where it was. And so to the person's question, how long was the road to recovery? What I would say is this: I was not on medication for very long at all. It was just shy of, I would say it was just shy of a year, um, tapering off, continuing to work with a mental health therapist. There was an adjustment period. Everyone's experience is different depending on what you're taking, the dosage amount, so on and so forth. But I found that I was able to begin enacting the coping skills that I'd learned in therapy and applied it as a natural way in my life. I had spent so long, my adulthood, especially in college, I spent so long dealing with this unnamed thing where I would freak out and have panic attacks and have long periods of depression. And I just figured it was normal. So when I finally, just identified in a really significant way that, okay, this isn't normal, there's something wrong, and agreed to go on medication, and then adopted these coping skills to the point where I could get off of medication. And it was this realization, and I've had this conversation with other folks who've been affected as well, where there's that thing that says, so is this how everyone else operates in the world? Like, this is what it feels like to be okay, to not think and constantly think about the worst thing that can possibly happen, to not be in a space where you feel as if nothing matters at all through periods of time. This is amazing. So the road to recovery varies for everyone. That's between you and your mental health provider or providers. But what I can say is this: every day is different. There are different triggers. There are different flows. Things like worldwide pandemics can maybe trigger certain things. Things like unemployment can definitely trigger certain things. But generally speaking, I wouldn't say that I'm cured from depression. I wouldn't say that. I would say that I am much more responsive to my triggers and am more readily able to do the things that I do to help me when it's happening. So doing things like exercising, scheduling an appointment with a therapist if I feel like it's really bad, looking at my diet. I mean, all of these things help. So I hope that answers your question.
That was a good answer, actually. So I'm just gonna give you some comments. So someone says, Rhonda says, me too, I was raised very religious. The pastors were oppressing their congregations without knowing it. Belinda says that you have a very calm and peaceful delivery. Yes, you do. And Rhonda says, I felt the same way, scared of taking any form of medication. I ended up having to see a doctor after 9/11. And when I saw the doctor, she said post-traumatic stress disorder. I took the medication for a month. I was better after that. Later on, other life things occurred.
Yeah.
We have so Rhonda says that she had panic attacks and anxiety attacks. And yes, I've shared with my husband and children. They are very aware. Another thing that may have had to do with these issues are even changes in the hormones as a woman. And I was going to talk about that as well, because that's something I have. But And Belinda says in her latest podcast episode, Michelle Obama spoke about low-grade depression. So she suffers from low-grade depression. And I think there's so many people around who suffer from depression and PTSD and other anxiety illnesses, and they don't say anything, and that we need more people to speak about that. I'll tell you guys about my personal in a moment. I want to get some of these questions. So work boundaries during COVID is challenging. Any suggestions, Adriana?
Absolutely. So I am a huge advocate because I struggle with it as well. Here's what I do sometimes. First things first, I utilize Outlook. Some of you may use your Google Calendar, what have you, but I use it like it is the Bible. I tell my team all the time, guys, if you need my time, if it's not on my calendar, it's not happening. And then and then once I accept it, you can take that as acceptance of the meeting. I make sure to do things like never schedule, as long as I can, I don't schedule back-to-back meetings. So you're not going to see my calendar blocked off from 1 to 4 o'clock with meetings back to back. I schedule times for me to close my laptop screen and take a walk. I schedule times for a 5-minute meditation. That has been one of the biggest things that I realize work best for me, because I know when that thing comes up that says 5-minute meditation or break, that's my me time to disconnect. It's also really important for me to uphold, I mentioned this earlier, uphold my work hours. So if I say that by 5:30, I'm done for the day. If I continue to take calls at 6 o'clock, then what does that communicate? That I'm not really
Yeah.
that done. So I have to maintain that and not live with fear that I'm going to be judged for it. Now I recognize that there are some instances where you got to put out a fire, but 9 times out of 10, it's not a fire.
That's true. It's somebody else's fire. It's not yours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Belinda says, I love it. I love it too. Rhonda says, so yes, the mental health issues are something that requires daily care and are well worth the efforts. Okay, so let's see. We have another question. Do you know any organizations that work with people living abroad? In Jamaica, West Indies, is where this person is. And so they say that mental health or illness is not viewed as a serious issue. I've not been successful locating resources. Okay, yes.
So you know what? I am not 100% sure about international organizations, but I do know that many of them exist. So I would love to get back to you. I'm very passionate about this. I am Jamaican. I don't think I told you that, Danette.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I am Jamaican, and so I do know that it can be tough when you have spaces where there are so many um, a lot of religious ideology really present and heavily discourages seeking mental health. But I really want to get back to you because there's a couple that I think I've heard of, but I don't want to give you the wrong answer now. So please shoot me an email and I'll share my contact information. I'll probably share my screen or something so you can just take a look and write down the information. But please reach out to me so I can connect you.
Also, everyone knows here in CDPD, you are supposed to connect with Adriana via LinkedIn, right? So you can follow up with her so that you don't put the burden on her to follow up with us. So you can connect with her and let her know what resonated in this presentation and if you have any questions, okay? So Rhonda says meditation and affirmations are everything. And Belinda says, maintain your work hours. Yes, thank you. I have a meeting now, but I really needed this conversation. Belinda, don't worry, come back on, you'll get the replay. Okay, I'll tag you in the replay. All right, so let's see what else I have. And you know, I said thank you for your vulnerability. You're helping so many people. Comment from Facebook. I just had to write this here. Praise God Almighty, you are here. You are standing. Most importantly, you use your experience to make an impact on others. And with mental health, I don't think people recognize the signs, only you do. Okay, so I don't have any more comments. I'm sure I missed some more comments earlier on in the feed. I don't have any more questions. I'll tell you guys personally, I suffer from PTSD and anxiety. I suffer from complex multi-level PTSD. From life, you know, a bunch of experiences that happen in life. And then I was in a terrorist attack in 2018. I had a car accident in 2019 was a terrorist attack in Kenya. 2008, that was 19. 3 months before that, that was January. 3 months before that, I was in a car accident. I was stuck in my car for a time. And then 3 months before the car accident, my home was demolished in Kenya. And all those things happened back to back to back to back. And prior to that, there was some, you know, living in out of the country in Kenya. We were evacuated for post-election violence twice. So all these things happened while I was working a very high stressful job as a leader as a senior organization responsible for up to 640 people at some point. And my job was very, very, very demanding. All that rolled around, coupled with being in another country. And I suffer from, I started to have panic attacks, didn't know what was happening. It was the first time I'd ever had them. Started to have severe insomnia, started to have short-term memory loss. So we would have a conversation, and before the conversation was over, I would ask you the same stuff that you had just said. And so I, you know, because I needed to be on all the time and I realized that that was happening to me, I got into the habit of constantly writing down everything people were saying to me in meetings. And I'm old school. I'm older than most of you. I'm 46. So I come from a time where you had to copy notes, so I could jot them down really quickly. And that was a way that I hid it from my team, from my staff and my colleagues. So I would just write everything down. Before the meeting was over, I would reiterate everything, right? And that was a way that I hid it. It didn't help me doing that, right? Because what I said is, oh, okay, I'm forgetting stuff, okay, not a problem. I can fix this, I can fix everything. I can always make everything happen. And it wasn't until I came home to the US that I realized I was still having all the same stuff was still happening, and I needed to speak to someone, and I still speak to someone, and I do take anti-anxiety medication. So I share that because it resonated with me when you said sleep patterns, overthinking, memory loss, apathy, everything except substance abuse. Well, yeah, substance abuse would be sugar. Okay. would have been my substance abuse would have been sugar, but all of that resonated, and I just kept chugging along because I am a woman, I am a Black woman, and I have to be better than everyone else in the workplace. And so this was yet another thing that I could work through. And I love this presentation. I think that you're countless people in our group and people who are not in our group that will tap in here. Let me see if I have anything else here. Rhonda says, you're Jamaican? Great. This was wonderful. She's Jamaican in Jamaica. This is one of my oldest friends. Thank you for your insight. Yes, your ability to be so open is amazing. It is, Adriana. And so I am going to ask you our 3 questions, and then we are going to end this. And I just want to thank you again for coming here and being so open with us. It takes a lot of integrity and courage, strength of courage and character, and I appreciate that. So Adriana, CDP's mission is to increase marginalized groups' access to employment opportunities and representation in the workforce by providing our members with free training, mentorship, and other resources. CDPD was created in response to record unemployment rates stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Now, my question to you is, have you or do you currently have you ever identified or currently identified as someone who was marginalized? If so, how?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been marginalized for my age, my race, my gender. In some instances, my beliefs, my social settings. I'm routinely marginalized, and it's something that I have accepted and have been raised from very early on to know that this is going to be a reality for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love it. I asked the question because I want everyone in this group to know that in spite of being marginalized, we can be successful, right? We can make things happen for ourselves and others. And even if you are a white male or white woman, if you can be marginalized, right? So you can be, as you said, age, race, gender, sexual orientation, thought, belief pattern, anything, that in spite of all of that, you can succeed, you can excel and succeed. So thank you for sharing that with us. My next question is, I don't know how old you are. So I can't say, like, I wanted to say one day, so what do you want to say to the 21-year-old you? And the person was like, I'm 20. So let me say this to you. Knowing what you know now, okay, knowing what you know now, I'm just, I'm not going to out anybody's age. Knowing what you know now, either about the topic that you discussed today or about just your professional journey, what would you have liked to know, or what would you like to say to Adriana when she started? So that could be the 20-year-old, the 21-year-old, something you learned, something you value, something you wish someone would have told you.
Or a ton of different things, but I think first things first would be that it is okay to strive for a life that's peaceful and that's content, and that you don't have to prove yourself worthy to anyone, because you are worthy by virtue of the fact that you're a person.
I love it.
I think if I'd known that, it would have saved me a lot of grief in many different ways, work, personal. Yeah.
I love that. All right. And then our final is kind of question, but it is, what would you like to leave us with today? What do you want us to know? One takeaway that you want to tell us?
The one takeaway, as far as this conversation has just always been, um, recognizing that it's okay if something's wrong. It's okay if you recognize that something is a little bit off, and believe that it is possible, especially for those of us who have been marginalized through a number of different areas, that it is not par for the course just by virtue of who we are to have to struggle.
Mhm.
If you're struggling mentally, if you find that it's just that much harder for you to make it through the day, there is another side. There is another way to work through this. And I really, really want everyone to recognize that. Yeah.
I
I'll leave
appreciate that.
it going. Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right. There's some comments that from earlier, but you'll look through the feed on Facebook. I again want to thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate this. This was a chat that we needed to have, a discussion. We need to have more discussions like this. I appreciate you and I thank you. Invite you to come back whenever you'd like, Adriana. And remember, guys, you need to connect with Adriana. I will post her LinkedIn information. Do you think that not teaching your children, oh gosh, they're going to be marginalized due to their race would alleviate? Do you think that not teaching your children they are going to be marginalized due to their race would alleviate some of the pressures and overthinking this will probably cause? I'll tell you,
Absolutely.
not teaching them, I think we need to teach them that they are marginalized, but I think we need to teach them that in spite of being marginalized, you can still be and do anything you want. You can achieve and have anything you want. Um, and being marginalized is not me feeling that I am marginalized. It's society or
Right.
people placing me in a position where I am marginalized, right? So even though I am marginalized, I'm going to fight through that by some of the things that hurt us, right? Being the
Yeah.
best, over studying, overachieving, over this. But I would rather have my children to know that than to believe that the playing field is level and that the way that it works for everyone else is the way that it works for them. Because I know people who believed that and they didn't do well in
Mhm.
life. Maybe they ultimately did, but they struggled very hard because they couldn't understand why things were different, because they were gay, or because they were Black, or because they were a woman, or because they didn't go to the right school or whatever. Didn't understand that people are judging you according to those things and placing you in boxes. So I don't say on that one, Adriana.
That pretty much the same exact thing with the additional note that if we expect to live in a world and in a country where we teach um, those who are uh, maybe coming from a place of more privileged about the ills of society and the challenges in society, where we have to teach them to not do that, to not oppress others,
Yes.
and then it's important to have that balance as well. It's an unfortunate balance, but it's one that we have to do. It can save a lot of grief, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some point in time, you're gonna find out. So it's
Yes.
if you find out from those that love you and want to prepare you.
Yeah. I love it. I love this afternoon. I thank you so much, Adriana. Again, you are welcome to come back whenever you'd like to talk about any topic you like. You are a friend of CDPD. You are a member. And I appreciate you. I really, really appreciate you for today. Thank you. And any way that I can support you, you let me know and I will. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeanette. This was great.
All right then. Bye-bye.